Every week, a lot happens in Parliament. Debates rage, bills are discussed, and laws are introduced. So it's easy to feel like you don't quite know what's going on in the chamber. So we're lifting the lid and telling you exactly what happened this week in Parliament. This week, we saw an exchange in PMQs about Tory Cronyism, a debate about the Overseas Operations Bill, and a Westminster Hall debate about making trespassing illegal. In the first story today, we're going to look at a topic which has blown up in the last couple of days, concerning how much access powerful people have to the current government. In addition to the controversy surrounding how contracts were awarded early on in the pandemic, we've seen the Greensill saga unfold over the last month or so, something we released a video about recently. It's linked down below. But this week it emerged that Boris Johnson had been texting with businessman James Dyson at the height of the crisis, and effectively promised Dyson's business a tax fix if he were to help out with the production of ventilators. Some, including Johnson, argue that this was just the Prime Minister doing what was needed to deliver for the nation at a time of crisis. But others have highlighted how easy it was for Dyson to get in contact with the Prime Minister, and the very informal nature of the correspondence. Kier Starmer predictably used this line of attack during PMQs, leading to the following exchange.
What does the Prime Minister think is the right thing to do if he receives a text message from a billionaire Conservative supporter asking him to fix tax rules?
If he's referring to the request from James Dyson, I make absolutely no apology at all, Mr. Speaker, for shifting heaven and earth and doing everything I possibly could, I think any Prime Minister would in those circumstances, to secure ventilators for the people of this country and to save lives and to roll out a ventilator procurement which the Labour-controlled Public Accounts Committee themselves said was a benchmark for procurement.
Let's be clear what these texts show. The Prime Minister was lobbied by a wealthy businessman and a close friend for a change in the tax rules. The Prime Minister responded, "I'll fix it." Then, after a discussion with the Chancellor, who everybody seems to be lobbying these days, the Prime Minister texted his friend to say, "It's fixed." How many other people with the Prime Minister's personal number has he given preferential treatment to?
Mr. Speaker, I recall the right honourable gentleman at the time saying that we should do everything that we could to get more ventilators, and indeed he congratulated the rollout of the ventilators.
Speaker, I'm surprised the Prime Minister brings up former leaders, since it's his former leader, his friend, I think, Dave, who's at the heart of much of this. And I acknowledge thousands of businesses stepped up during the pandemic. That was a good thing, and we celebrate that. The difference is they didn't all have the chance to text the Prime Minister, ask him to fix the tax situation in exchange for doing it. That's the difference. At the heart of this scandal are people's jobs and wasted taxpayers' money.
But what do you think? Is this a case of government cronyism, or just a more modern, informal way of procuring pandemic essentials? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. In the second story today, we look at the fallout surrounding the Overseas Operations Bill. Its core aim is to formally create a presumption against prosecution for offences performed by members of the armed forces while deployed abroad, establishing a statute of limitations for said offences at 5 years. In plain speak, if a prosecutor wants to bring proceedings against a member of the armed forces more than 5 years after it happened, they can't do so without the consent of the Attorney General, with the government arguing that this was necessary to stop frivolous lawsuits against the military. The issue Parliament has raised, though, is with the scope of the bill, with both the Lords and the government's own Veterans Minister, former Veterans Minister, taking issue with it. That's because for the purpose of the bill, overseas deployment relates to operations outside the British Isles, essentially excluding those who served during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. For Mercer, the exclusion of those serving in Northern Ireland was a red line, causing him to resign and launch a tirade against the government. The Lords had a different issue with it, though. Under the original terms, the bill contained no limits on what the alleged conduct could include, except for sexual offences. i.e., torture, genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes would have all been immune from prosecution after the 5-year period had elapsed. The Lords quickly introduced an amendment that exempted those crimes from the bill and returned it to the Commons on Wednesday. Opening up the Commons debate was the new Minister for Defence People and Veterans, attempting to make clear the government's position on the Lords' amendment and assuage concerns about the Northern Irish issue.
I call new Minister Leo Doherty to move to disagree with the Lords Amendment 1.
I beg to move that this House disagrees with Lords Amendment 1. Importantly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would also like to confirm to the House, although not in the scope of the discussion today, that a bill will soon come forward from the Northern Ireland Office that will protect our Northern Ireland veterans of Operation Banner and address the legacy of the Troubles. And I know that this will be of sincere interest to many members of the House here today. Those who have served are the finest among us, and this government is resolutely committed to delivering through legislation the protections that our veterans of the Troubles in Northern Ireland deserve. The Lords Amendment adds a new subclause to Clause 6 and has the effect of excluding genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes and torture offences from the measures in Part 1 of this bill. I should like to repeat what has been said many times during the passage of this bill. The decision to exclude only sexual offences from the measures in Part 1 of the bill did not mean that the government would not continue to take its international obligations in respect of other offences extremely seriously.
The overarching plan has come under fire with the prosecutors at the International Criminal Court, highlighting that the statute for limitations seeking to be implemented by the government will increase the chances of the ICC stepping in and prosecuting themselves. John Healey, the Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, highlighted this further.
Each one of these amendments had strong crossbench backing. Each had the most senior military members of the Lords signed up. Each was passed with a big majority in the other place. And I say to members opposite, not a single Conservative peer spoke in favour of the government or against these 4 amendments in the House of Lords. And I hope that gives Conservative members pause for thought about just how isolated their ministers are on these amendments and how they failed entirely to convince an ever-widening group of distinguished individuals, experts and specialist groups about this bill.
We'll have to see exactly how the government goes ahead with this bill and whether the Lords' amendments are indeed accepted. In the last story today, we'll take a look at Westminster Hall debate. This debate happened specifically because of an e-Petition. More precisely, it asked the government not to criminalise trespass, something the government promised to do in their manifesto through the promise to crack down on unauthorised encampments. Conservative MP Catherine Fletcher raised the petition, stating that
My right honourable friend, the Minister for Policing and Crime, stated that the government had made a clear manifesto commitment to act on the issue of unauthorised encampments and remains determined to ensure police have the powers that they need. As a result, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill 2021 introduces intentional trespass as a criminal offence. The Don't Criminalise Trespass petition was set up by Guy as he has a series of concerns about unintended consequences for countryside lovers and those who seek to reside in it. In his view, criminalising intentional trespass could lead to, not exclusively but just in a short form, prosecuting ramblers who stray from the path by accident.
As Ms Fletcher makes clear, there have been concerns raised about the unintended consequences of people accidentally straying from public rights of way. She also raised the point that wild camping and forging new paths in the countryside could be criminalised under the new law. One of the biggest issues raised, though, was with that of the traveller community. As the government's written response to the petition makes clear, this is one of the biggest reasons for them bringing in the bill. The government claimed that action is needed to address the sense of unease and intimidation residents feel when an unauthorised encampment occurs. The frustration at not being able to access amenities, public land and business premises, and the waste and cost that is left once the encampment is moved on. And this is what Ms Fletcher had to say on the topic.
Farmers and landowners are experiencing difficulty with unlawful encampments, and the traveller community has concerns about their way of life and being judged by the actions of a minority, which is also shared by the petitioners.
Adding to this, Andy Slaughter, a Labour MP, was far more strong in his language against the move to make trespass illegal.
I say this regretfully, but I can only reach the conclusion that this is a rather nasty, racist little attempt to attack minority ethnic communities already suffering severe discrimination and other socially marginalised groups. No family willingly stops somewhere they are not welcome, that has no running water, waste disposal or electricity, and where they will be harassed. The reason for unauthorised encampments is the lack of authorised sites, whether they be permanent or transit sites. And the number of permanent transit sites on aggregate have gone down over the past 10 years by several hundred. Gypsies and travellers are one of the most marginalised and discriminated against groups in this country. Their outcomes, whether in health, education, life expectancy, are the worst of any ethnic minority groups.
Kit Malthouse, a government minister, replied to the concerns, specifically the ones focusing on traveller communities.
Now, turning to the impact on traveller communities set out in the petition statement. This is not, Mr Chairman, an anti-traveller law, and it would be wrong to portray it as such. We know that a small minority of people in unauthorised encampments do cause harm and disruption and distress, but the vast majority of travellers are law-abiding citizens, and unauthorised sites can often give an unfair and negative image of their communities. Enforcement will very obviously not be based on ethnicity. Rather, anyone who causes significant harm, disruption or distress, refuses to leave when asked to do so, will be caught by the offence.
Let us know what you think about this bill in the comments below, and which side of the argument you fall on. If you want to be updated with what happens in Parliament next week, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.